Welcome to The Sensitive One. I'm Gina Susan Long, nutritionist for highly sensitive people, and today I'm going to be speaking with Food Allergy Counsellor Simone Albert. As I mentioned in last week's episode, in the next few interviews we're going to be focusing on the psychological impact of living with food reactions and how we can deal with that. In many ways, I feel that the mental impact and stress that comes with facing severe food reactions is the greatest challenge that we have to face, and perhaps particularly because the kind of support we need, the emotional and mental support, isn't as clearly defined or embedded into the process of getting a diagnosis and getting treatment. Simone Albert, however, saw this need after her own experience with her son's food allergies, and she now works with individuals and families who have been impacted in other ways and are looking to find healthy ways to cope, to move forward, and even to grow stronger as a family following a food allergy diagnosis. She recently released her book, Beyond the Allergy Diagnosis, to guide families through the different stages of change and to provide coping skills and tools to help families not just to survive but to thrive. I'll let Simone explain in more detail her own experiences and how she fell into the role of a food allergy counsellor. So here's Simone, and I'll see you on the other side. Simone Albert is a food allergy counsellor based in Victoria, Australia, and she has written a book called Beyond the Allergy Diagnosis, a guide to understanding and navigating the emotional and psychological phases of allergies. Welcome, Simone. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
How did you come to this point where you have decided to focus on this space and become a food allergy counsellor? So what was your own journey?
I became a counsellor first and foremost. So I'm a generalised counsellor, registered counsellor, working with families and individuals. So I am also a registered nurse. I worked in the neurological field. I'm a neuro nurse, and that's where my love for the mind came from. I love all things psychology, and I actually completed a graduate diploma of psychology and a diploma of counselling years ago. And then I had a family, and that's where I understood the elements of allergies. So my second son, my younger son, had allergies at the age of 7 months. So I went from being a family that had two young children to then becoming an allergy family at 7 months. He had a near death allergic reaction, anaphylactic shock, and that's where we were introduced to severe allergies. Then it was through those experiences that came after that that I realized there's a huge emotional, psychological element to allergies, to living with allergies that affects the whole family and extended family, actually, in fact. So the child that's living with allergies, the parents, siblings, grandparents, aunties, uncles, friends, it affects everyone. So that's where I needed to action some time towards becoming specialized in that field and helping families, uh, include some strategies into their day-to-day living to help them and support them in living a full life with allergies or any chronic condition.
Yeah, and that's so important because, allergies have skyrocketed in the last couple of decades too. So this is becoming, a problem that affects so many people. I think it's currently about 10% of children that experience food allergy
Mm,
right now in Australia. I think that's the prevalence at the moment,
yep.
and that's a lot of people that are
Mm.
being affected by this.
Yeah, it's not only the big thing about that is 1 in 10, it's not only the children, it then goes further. So that's, it's a huge amount of people that it's affecting
Mm.
from a mental health perspective.
Yes, absolutely. So you work with families that have allergies. Do you ever work with people that have intolerances as well, or is it mostly just allergies?
For my own work at the moment, it is mostly allergies that I see in crisis situations. So they're at the end of their tether with managing the mindset. They're normally living with chronic anxiety, maybe food aversions, a lot of stress and overwhelm, and they're just needing that support to move through that to live a full life. So, the intolerance, I haven't received any clients to this date with intolerances. They seem to be able to perhaps manage that a little bit more, or the awareness is not there yet for how we can support each other.
Yeah, I think with intolerances, it probably comes down to how severe they are.
Mm, mm,
Because, there's such a big variation. There's people who have, one or two, and
mhm,
then there's people who have multiple and, are surviving on 3 foods.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and with allergies, you've got that, when it's an anaphylactic allergy and there's a life-threatening component,
mhm.
yeah, that's just a whole different kettle of fish, and so I'm wondering, the people that are seeking help, are they people who have life-threatening allergies or anaphylactic allergies mostly, or is it, other types of allergies as well?
Yeah, mostly the people I see in that specialist niche area are people that either have suffered a traumatic anaphylactic reaction and are recovering from that trauma and are wanting to move forward from that and move back to pre reaction lifestyle. There's that element. Then there's, yeah, so most of my clients are people that are living with multiple severe food allergies.
Yeah, and, when you talk about that, it sounds like there's some sort of post-traumatic stress going on there. So, would you say that these people actually are experiencing a post-traumatic stress disorder, which often happens after I think people usually associate PTSD with, things like car accidents,
Mm,
near-death experiences, being
mm.
attacked. But would you say that's what this is essentially, that this is PTSD?
Some would have the diagnosis PTSD. Some would just be post traumatic stress and they're working through that and they need some support in moving through that to return back to a pre traumatic experience way of living. So it really depends on how they've moved through that, how soon the support has been looked into, if they've been living with this for a long time and they haven't recovered from the trauma. The thing with allergies, as opposed to a car accident or fires or floods or things like that, that's where most of our work is done with, you know, psychological first aid and trauma relief post one of those natural disasters, is that the chances of it happening again are very little. It can happen again, but very unlikely. With allergies and severe allergies, the chances of having an anaphylactic reaction again are quite real. They're not unreal. Experiences that they're feeling, the feelings and thoughts that they're experiencing are very real. So, to move through that trauma and to heal from that trauma is extremely important because they have to go and live with this condition post that anaphylactic reaction. So it's really important to move through that trauma, heal from it, um, have strategies to work through it, knowing that it is a possibility that it can happen again.
And as far as psychological support goes, I know that you're a food allergy counselor and you've really looked into this and researched this area so that you can specifically help people in this very unique situation. But I'm wondering, what about other psychologists or counselors? Do you think that the support that is there in terms of mental health support is able to address this, or are they not prepared for this very unique kind of situation where people are living with this? So it's real. It's very real.
Mm,
Um, I remember the first time I spoke to you, we had a chat, and you mentioned something about the way we treat phobias,
mm.
and how it's different to how we would need to treat an allergy. I think that's what you said anyway.
Mm, mm.
Can you speak a bit more about that?
Clients have been referred to me from psychologists. I do believe that psychologists and counselors have been trained in the field to be able to deal with anxieties and PTS relating to allergies. It's more that they probably don't understand it enough to be able to support their clients to the degree that they need to. So they don't want to push their clients with any phobia. They're able to work through real and unreal experiences. With this, it's a very real experience. So they're not sure how far they can maybe push their clients. There are other psychologists and counsellors around Australia that specialise in this area. The industry is growing as the need grows, as our awareness grows in the field of mental health. But I suppose every psychologist and counselor is trained in trauma, in anxiety, in those conditions that may arise with living with allergies. It just depends on where the client sits in that spectrum at the time as to whether a psychologist or a counselor that doesn't have that lived experience feels comfortable in working with those clients. I work in a care team, so sometimes I have a very open minded approach in the holistic care of these. So if I see that my client would be better suited to a psychologist, I'm happy to work with them and be a part of that care team, a dietitian, a GP, an allergist. It's good to work as a team, I think, so everyone can learn and support the client as best possible.
Oh, that's great. So if somebody was listening to this and they realize that they're someone who has had a traumatic experience around this and it is affecting their lives, that they're unable to, as you say, continue with life as normal, um, what would you recommend to them? How would they seek support?
I'll definitely reach out first and foremost to either your allergist or your GP. And normally, your allergist and GP have people on their books that they can recommend. So I would definitely express to them that you're having mental health issues relating to this condition. Unless our care team knows this, it's very difficult for them to recommend. I have found that a lot of my clients that go to their allergist don't have the time to discuss this element in their treatment. So, if that's the case, they can raise this with their GP. And it's really important to seek the help if their mind health isn't up to scratch as far as supporting them in their quality of life in day to day. It's one thing to have their physical condition looked into, asthma, eczema, allergies, and all those conditions. From a physical point of view, from a medical point of view, it's one thing, but their mind health in relation to this is another. So, reach out for help is really key.
Okay, great. So you're saying that a GP, and this is, I suppose, specific to Australia. Would you say this is true of other countries?
To reach out to GPs.
Yes.
I have a little bit of experience with the UK, Canada, and the US. Their first port of call would be similar, either their specialist. I know some people have access to specialists directly in Europe, whereas we have to go through our GP, our general practitioner, to get a referral to them. So that's why I say here in Australia, it's first and foremost our first port of call. If you already have a relationship with a specialist, raise it there, or you can go directly to a psychologist or counselor if you have that knowledge and information.
And would you be looking for something specific? Because often I know psychologists and counselors will specialize or they'll work preferentially in certain areas.
Mm,
Would they be looking for somebody who works with PTS or
mm.
PTSD?
So, the key things to look for, I would recommend, is someone that specializes, if it's your child, someone that specializes in pediatric psychology, uh, someone that might specialize in anxiety if that's what is causing you to look for support in this area. Anything that's relating to your situation for looking for mental health support. So if it's anxiety, there's special people that specialize in that. PTS, there's people that specialize in that. If it's your child, look for a pediatric psychologist or counselor if that's possible, or someone that works with children and has an understanding of children. It's a very different kettle of fish when you're working with a child. And if it's a very young child, that's also very important. But that would be my advice. Look for someone that's specialized. If and then each specialty goes into another niche. So if you can't find someone, start with something a little bit more broad, like anxiety, and then work from there.
Okay, that sounds like great advice. And I'm wondering, so you work with families who have food allergies. Are there any kinds of psychotherapies that you think work best for this type of condition? How do you actually work with people?
So I have a person-centered approach, and then I work with what they raise to me and to the appointment, and then I work from there. So if it's anxiety, there's a lot of evidence-based therapies relating to that, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's used to help people working through anxiety, trauma. ACT, which is acceptance commitment therapy, is also a well known research base. Sometimes it's solution focused. So, any evidence based therapies that I am trained in and are key for the situation that's presented to us.
And when people come in to see you, what kind of emotional impact do they experience? So, what do they actually come in with?
So, a lot of the times I see families that are what I would say in a crisis situation, in a more heightened, stressed anxiety situation. So, they've come to me when they've been living not necessarily with allergies for a long time, but with the situation that they're presenting with. So their child might have happily been going to school, and then all of a sudden they don't want to participate in lunchtime activities or food related activities in school. They're avoiding social situations, they're avoiding going to parties that they once went to. They don't feel comfortable going on holidays and things like that. So they'll present with that kind of representation, which is called an avoidance behavior, and it's affecting their quality of life. So they're not wanting to go to school anymore. It might go to that extreme. It might be that they're not eating their lunch anymore at school because they're afraid. So when they present with that, I work with them for that particular behavior at the time.
Okay. And that tends to be typical.
Yeah, that or working through the trauma of anaphylactic reaction. It could be the person that had the anaphylactic reaction, or it could be their sibling that's having a few difficulties moving through there. It could be a parent. I work with those kind of situations as well. It's really whatever the person presents with. I would love to work more with preventative mindfulness to work through these. So when a situation does happen, they have the tools and strategies to work with that, building resilience around those situations. But at the moment, it's more when we're in a more crisis situation.
Yeah, well, I can just imagine, and I don't know if you went through this as a parent, that seeing your child go through an anaphylactic reaction would be incredibly traumatic, because, there is that sense of helplessness that
Mm,
probably comes with it.
mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, we have found my son has had 6 anaphylactic reactions, and the body is an amazing thing. So I think the person going through it goes into some form of shock if it's a full blown anaphylactic reaction. And a lot of the times he may not even remember the incident. He remembers what happened before and what happened after. He may not even remember that, depending on how severe the reaction was. My oldest son and myself have always been there for every reaction, and I think it affected us more. We probably suffered from PTSD more than our son that had the reaction, which is quite an interesting thing. But it really depends on the character of the person and who they are and where they are at the time of that traumatic event, as to how you move through that and where your resilience is. So we worked on building our resilience around that, learning from the experience, working out how we could perhaps improve the situation. We learnt that the adrenaline auto injector is what saves lives, making sure we had that every time with us, making sure we understood how to use it, knowing the procedures, working on like the drills, the emergency drills surrounding that, which then empowered us to feel safe in if that did happen again, that we would know what to do. We hope that it never did, but if it did, we would be prepared and not scared.
That's great. And it's lovely that you could share that with your oldest son as well
Mm,
and learn how to cope together. That's really beautiful. And your youngest son, you said he was 7 months old when he
mm,
started having anaphylactic reactions?
mm, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he was quite young. And that's interesting. It actually makes sense to me that sometimes the people that are witnessing the experience might be more traumatized by it, and possibly depending on how old the child is when they're having the anaphylactic reaction, whether they remember it later. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And something that I think I do actually hear a lot from people who have allergies and also intolerances is that the anxiety of it can also lead to certain coping behaviors that might even trigger something like an eating disorder.
Mhm.
So, because of that anxiety that can happen around food and around eating, and even, having rituals in place to make sure that the food is not contaminated, do you think that that can lead to eating disorders?
Yes, definitely. Yes, it can, depending on the person again, and what safety net boundaries you have in place, and understanding that these routines and these boundaries that you put in place can be altered as age comes into place. So they're very age dependent. And a lot of people have them in place when they're younger because they have everything in their mouths and they touch everything and they want to be a part of everything, and then just keep them because it's worked. It's easy, and these can cause some issues as the child develops psychologically as they get older. If we don't change those boundaries and those things that we have in place, it can cause some issues depending on what they are. Some families quite comfortable not having those strict safety boundaries in place. So it really depends on the person, what things you as a family need to have in place, understanding, knowing that they're flexible and that they can be moved as the child grows and takes on more independent roles in their own advocacy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when the child is very young and they might have an anaphylactic allergy, there might be more controlled
Mm,
behaviors around making sure that there's no food around that they could get hold of that they're allergic to.
mm,
But once the child is older and they have the awareness to be able to practice their own kind of care around what they touch and what they eat, you can actually loosen some of those controls, and that helps to also give the child maybe more confidence
mm,
as well and independence.
mm. It's really important to include them in that and to give them the understanding and awareness, not just to have those restrictions in place and those boundaries in place, but to include them in them so they understand what you're doing to protect them. So they're learning and they feel safe and they know why they feel safe.
Yeah, so it's giving them context to why you're behaving this way and what
Yes,
the purpose of it is,
yes,
rather than just learning that as a that just as a general behavior.
yes. It's very important, actually. I've seen a lot of 9, 10, 11-year-olds when they're wanting that independence, they're getting a greater understanding of what's going on around them, that they then have greater fears at that age. They're understanding their own mortality more at that age. And therefore, if they haven't been privy to how you're protecting them and what goes into protecting them, there's a lot of fear that can evolve at that age.
And it's interesting you say that because I wonder if sometimes parents actually think it's the opposite, that
Mm,
if they don't tell them what's happening, they're actually protecting them.
mm. Yeah, I wonder that too, but it's very important for them to know exactly why you're carrying their medication everywhere you go, to understand why you're reading labels all the time, and to introduce that to them as a part of their way of staying safe.
Yeah, and that also brings me to something that you spoke about in your book. So something you identify in the book is the importance of role modeling
Mm,
for a parent of an allergic child. Can you explain a bit more about what role modeling is and how it works in the parent-child relationship and how it's significant for allergic children?
mm. So children learn from us all the time even when we don't realize that they're learning from us. They learn from what we do more so than what we say. And it's really important for them to understand and become independent in their allergy journey to learn from us. So if we can role play, if we can explain what we're doing at the time of doing it, then it's really a great learning experience for them and they'll take that on board. I know that every time we would go to the supermarket, I would show that I'm reading the labels. I would explain what I'm doing. Even though they may not be able to read, I would show them that I was doing all the right steps to keep them safe and why I was doing that and why it's important to do that and how that works. And then eventually over time, they were able to read the labels. I think there was a period where then my eyesight was not great with those really tiny labels and that they are. And I would get my son then to read the labels for me out loud. I would always double check when I got home, when I got my glasses on. But it was a really good experience for him to transition into independence a little bit more, to know that we are working together to keep him safe. And all of those life lessons are really good because they know they're not alone. They know what's happening. They understand what's happening and their awareness is greater.
Yeah, so it's helping them to develop that independence, as you say.
Mm, yep.
Something you mentioned with your own experience in regards to your son and your older child and you being there most of the time when your younger son was having anaphylactic reactions reminds me of something else that I read in your book, which was identifying the fact that everybody processes the situation differently when somebody in the family has a food allergy, and that it depends very much on their personal experience with it and how close they've been to the experience with it, and how those differences in experience and perspective can actually create a disconnect between family members, between couples, and even friends when it comes to the experience of an allergy and an allergy diagnosis. So, what can that look like, and how do we cope with that? What do we do around it?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I think when people are processing this information differently, I think it's really important to have the awareness that that can happen. I think that's first and foremost because we don't expect that to happen. I think as humans, we expect people to feel as we feel. We want people to feel the same as us and understand us without maybe perhaps verbalizing how we're actually feeling. We assume that others will understand what we're going through. So it's really important to have clear communication. And if we haven't verbalized how we're feeling and how an event has made us feel, then we can't expect people to understand how we're feeling at that time.
Mhm.
On the flip side, we can't expect everyone to feel the same as us that may not have gone through that experience. Or if they have gone through that experience, they might be able to process it in a different way. Their way of working through that experience may be to shut down and not think about it, or it might be to go and run really fast and exert all that adrenaline that they got from that experience and release it that way. Everyone's coping skills are very different. And I think just creating an awareness around that everyone's coping skills are different and how we react to situations is different is a very key and powerful instrument in moving forward and keeping a family happy and together.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you just said about how people won't know how you're feeling or what you're going through unless you verbalize
Mm,
it. And I think it's so true that we do just assume that, of course, if we're upset, that other people will understand our perspective
mm,
and how it's landed for us, how
mm.
that experience has actually affected us.
Yep.
And I thought it was such an important thing to bring up in the book that you wrote about food allergies, because I even relate to this as somebody who experienced food
Mhm.
intolerances, that there was a real disconnect between my experience and other people in my life.
Mm.
And that kind of branches out to friends as
Mhm.
well, so not
Mhm.
just family members.
Mhm.
And I think it can be quite hurtful
Mm.
sometimes for the person who has been very close to the experience, or the person who's having the experience
Mhm.
themselves, when they feel like other people don't understand the gravity of it.
Mhm.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that it's actually important to verbalize how you're feeling,
Mhm.
and know that we do need to communicate things with other people, that they won't necessarily understand our perspective without us doing that. And also, as you say, that it's important for families to understand each other,
Mhm.
that we do have different ways of coping with things. And just because somebody doesn't cope the way we cope doesn't mean that they aren't also affected by
Yes.
it.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
key. And it's with any chronic condition, but it's also with what's happening with mental health awareness at the moment with Are You OK Day and things like that. It's really important to understand that next level. It's not just about asking, Are you okay? And it's not just about saying, I'm fine. It's really about opening yourselves up to vulnerability to get the support that you need, and it's really it's a massive step, I think, in society for everyone. At the moment we're transitioning through this period at the moment that's bringing, it's kind of bringing mental health to the forefront almost on steroids, and this is what we really need to understand, that unless we express ourselves clearly, we can't expect other people to understand how we're feeling. And then on the flip side, people need to be open to receiving that information and showing some compassion and empathy towards what other people are expressing. They're both really important and valid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the feedback I've had about that as well, the Are You OK Day, is that when somebody is actually open and vulnerable about how they're feeling, I think a lot of the time people don't know how to
Mhm.
respond to that. And that, maybe what needs to happen is that we need to develop these skills around
Mhm.
empathy. And yeah, I think it's actually it's probably a lot more simple than people think it
Mhm.
is. Um, that it is just a matter of, being open to hearing how somebody is feeling, and just listening, I
Mhm.
think, is valuable, and expressing empathy. Yeah.
Definitely, and a lot of people shut down when they hear that information. They go, "No, I'm not doing really good," and they're like, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna maybe avoid that person. I'm not gonna touch base." But it's really quite the contrary. It's about opening up that space for them. You really don't have to do anything, but let them know you're there. You don't have to fix the problem. You just have to be a listener, and show that compassion and empathy towards them, to know that someone's there for them, and that they understand as best they can and are there if you choose to ask something of them. And that's the same with intolerances and allergies. We don't want to be shut out being invited to parties. We may say no to the first 10 invitations until we feel safe, but we also don't want to feel that you're closed off to us. And that then shows true empathy and compassion. Whereas if you just go, this is all too hard, I'm not going to be able to deal with that, I have to change the foods. It's not about that. It's just about sharing that you're open to having us there, and we will look after the rest.
Hmm. I think one of the best questions, or ways of supporting people that I have heard in this space, but others as well, mental health in general, is just asking, "How can I help
Mm,
you?" I think it's as simple as that. And this is a really it's a good guideline for people who want to know how to support somebody who is in this space, somebody who has an allergy, because I think a lot of the time, yeah, there is that lack of knowing, how do I actually deal with this
mhm,
as an outsider? How do I help this
mm.
person?
And generally, people want to fix things and they want to do things. So many people say, well, I can make the cake. I can make it the way you need to make it. And a lot of the boundaries, the safety boundaries that allergy families have in place is to bring their own food, to make it themselves. And then they feel um, uncomfortable in saying, no, 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 the person's gone to so much effort. So it's not about actually fixing the problem. It's about being open and understanding and asking the person how they can truly help, and where that sits with the allergy family.
Yeah. And what about the person who's on the other end? Because for the person who has an allergy, and I think this is something you also mentioned in your book, which I thought was very apt, is that people come to this with different personalities and different levels of comfort around asking for
Mm,
help, asking for support, um, dealing with being fussed over or being the center of attention. in a situation, maybe where you're eating
Mm.
socially. How do we ask for support? How do we communicate our needs effectively? And then also, I'm interested to know how you actually help people who struggle to ask for help.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Everyone's different. Some people are really good at that. I know in our family, we learnt that my husband isn't afraid of asking for that help or telling people what to do, whereas I'm more a doer and a helper and a giver, and that's just in my personality. So I will help anyone to the nth degree, but to ask for help is very difficult. So we just learnt that very early on, and we work that in with our family. But I think what's key here is to introduce your children to this very early, your allergy child. If you have children, if you're an adult growing with this, it's a different set of circumstances. But as a child, it's really good. I know that we introduce very early because as humans, we're very good at saying thank you. And, if someone offers you a lolly, you accept it without upsetting anyone. So we taught our children very early to say it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no, and we can share other things. And showing them through role play that this is how we do it. We practice it. It's a practiced behavior. It's really quite difficult as humans for some of us to do those activities. Like someone's offering you so much and you say no, that's quite rude. So we teach our children very early, and I suggest this to families often, to role play at home and to introduce that no thank you, I'm okay, I have my own food. To ask for help, I think that's up to the individual and to the family as to what boundaries they have in place for protecting their child, and that's okay. It's okay to say, "No, I don't need that kind of support, but I would love to still be invited. If it's okay, I'll bring my own food." Or, "Is it okay I come and I am happy to look after the EpiPen myself?" Or, "Is it okay that I teach you? Do you feel comfortable?" Asking what the person feels comfortable with also, and opening up the conversation in that way. I think building resilience, working through situations that might cause a little bit of conflict within yourself, building self-esteem, building confidence are things that I work with a lot of families and children.
It sounds like the emphasis is really around
Yes,
communication. So this situation really forces people or pushes them to have to communicate more openly with people. And I guess that can be a really good thing if you can develop those
yes,
communication skills.
yes. It's a bit confronting for some people. But if you can gain that experience, you'll be using it lifelong, and you can represent yourself and you can speak for yourself. I know going into schools, it can be quite confronting talking to the teachers, but as long as you have a really open and honest communication style, then nobody is going to fault you for that.
Yeah. And what about in a situation where you're at a restaurant or it's a food
Hmm.
business? I'm wondering, how do people deal with those situations where they have to ask for special needs,
Mm.
special dietary needs
Yeah,
to be
it
met?
can be quite confronting, I think, and some people choose not to do that. And it's a big thing in the allergy world that you must represent yourself. So, building the self confidence and self respect in being able to talk up for yourself. The big thing for us in the whole time that we've been living this for 15 years now, it has only happened once to us. So I know that may not be the case. It depends on how often you go out, but it's only happened once to us where someone refused to serve us. And you know what? I was kind of happy that they acknowledged that they weren't willing to and they weren't going to go above and beyond, because when it's severe allergies, it really needs a holistic approach. It needs to come from the waitress, the chef, the staff, the manager. It needs to come from everyone. And if you're not able to do that, I'd rather know that. And it was quite confronting at the time. I was there with extended family, and it was a restaurant that they went to regularly. We didn't, but they did, and they refused to ever go back. So it was very confronting. It was a big thing, but I always learn from these experiences and take life lessons from them into how we might be able to approach it better. So quite often we will ring ahead. We might talk to the senior people in the restaurant prior to going there to give them a heads up. So it's not as confronting to them either, to be able to see if they would be able to manage our situation. I understand that this can't be done always, but I'm also open to, and that's been a lesson I've learned. That hasn't come naturally, but I'm now open and understanding that sometimes they cannot look after us in the way that we need to. We also make sure that we communicate quite openly and honestly and fully with all of the team. So the waitress, and if they're open for us to talk to the chef, or the chef wants to come out and talk to us, we do that. We always do that for our allergy child last in ordering. So then if questions do come up, they can happen at the end of the ordering process, and then the waitress is not as flustered, I don't think, in our experience. So yeah, it's definitely practice makes perfect kind of thing, and it's working through some internal confrontations that we might have as a family, and also building that experience.
That's such a good idea that you order the child's or the child with an allergies food last.
Mm.
That's a pretty good tip, I think, for people.
We also have chef's cards that we send with the waitress that says the allergens, and so they can actually physically hand over, because restaurants are busy. We try to go out of busy hours, to help. We're trying to work as a team with them, not making it harder for them. And we give them, the waitress, the chef's card, which has on there the allergens, and then the chef will visually see that. Then they'll put it on the plate, and then the plate will be returned with that food that should have been prepared in the way it needed to be prepared to keep the child safe.
So we know that when a child has food allergies or somebody in the family has food allergies, it can be a traumatic experience to witness a life-threatening allergy, for example. And we spoke about PTS and PTSD. Something you mentioned to me when we spoke the first time was something called post-traumatic growth.
Mhm.
Can you speak a bit more about that?
Mm.
What is that?
Mm. We actually see these days with social media now being so prolific that there's a lot of families that now turn to post traumatic growth in helping them through this situation. Actually, a lot of people that live with a chronic condition or have been newly diagnosed with a chronic condition will turn to this. So that's where you will take your situation and you'll turn it to good. And that will power you through the difficult times. There's a lot of parental allergy groups, social media pages that talk to this now. And that's exactly what it is. It's post traumatic growth. It's turning a difficult situation into a positive situation, and that helps you to move forward.
I guess it's true, and I can say this from my own experience, that the experience of having a condition like food allergies, like food intolerances, or any other kind of chronic illness, it can be very
Mm.
wounding in certain ways. It can cause it can have psychological impacts
Hmm.
and long term negative effects, emotional impacts. But there's also ways that we grow
Hmm.
and become stronger from these experiences and situations. And I think what we were just discussing around communication and how you may be somebody who comes to a situation like this, finding it difficult to speak up and ask for help and communicate and be assertive. And if you can actually use this as an opportunity to develop skills to challenge yourself around communication, for example, it can actually be an opportunity to grow
Yes.
in some way, to become stronger.
Yes. There's a
Yeah.
lot of, once we stop and we quieten the noise in our mind, then there's a lot of, you reflect, and I do that in the book. I ask for people to reflect at the end of certain chapters on how this has been a positive experience, because if we sometimes only focus on how it's affected us and perhaps even affected our identity, I know that it changed my identity quite a bit, but then I grew again, and I grew in a positive way. So a lot of allergy families say, well, it actually has made us look at what's in our food and really understand what's in our food. So that has to be a positive. It's made us, maybe cook more from scratch and become healthier in our food choices, which is definitely a big positive. So looking towards how it's changed us in a positive light is sometimes also really a good way of being able to move forward. I think for humans, change is not always easy, and that's what it comes to with any chronic newly diagnosed chronic condition, is that it's a big amount of change in the beginning. So if we're able to get the mental health support from the beginning, if it's introduced to us early, then we can feel more empowered by moving through those transitions more easily and growing from the experience.
So again, once again, from my own experience, I would say that learning how to cope on a mental, emotional level is kind of the core
Mhm.
in many ways of learning how to cope with an
Mhm.
illness. And having those that support, as you say, is so important from the beginning,
Mhm.
perhaps, of going through this experience. So, what advice would you give to people who are confronting this reality for the first time and they're dealing with that initial period of overwhelm?
Oh, that's a really difficult question because at that time it is all so much. It's just all mind consuming. It's very difficult sometimes for some families to see a way forward. Just knowing that by learning, by moving forward, it does get easier as the child grows, takes on more independence. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's a little bit like grieving. It's a change in our future. We've had that loss of the future we once thought we would have, maybe perhaps a future that we had dreamt of. We have that loss. And like grieving, it's very overwhelming in the beginning, but slowly but surely we find a way of where to place that grief, to place that change, to learn from the change, to grow from the change, and there is a way forward. Seeking help early is always key. Gaining, I sometimes get clients that say, I'm just not sure why I need to reach out to you, but I'm reaching out to you. And I may only have 2 or 3 sessions with those clients because they've got it all within them. It's just helping them recognize that, and dealing with that in the time of overwhelm. Sometimes we can't think clearly, we can't see a way forward. And it's just giving them the strategies and tools and techniques to help them manage that overwhelm, that anxiety, that stress. It's called a coping toolbox, and we build on that toolbox. I think it would be great if every child had that, regardless of whether they had a chronic condition or not, because we're always going to have problems and situations arise in our life. So I say to those families that these are life tools that they're always going to have, no matter what. So I think just knowing that there's help and support out there, reaching out for help and support, understanding your condition more, understanding the strategies around that will help you move forward.
Yeah, so not just sitting with it by
Mhm.
yourself, but actually taking action
Mhm.
and seeking support from people like yourself, so food allergy counselors, from psychologists, and also obviously from
Mhm.
dietitians and allergists, because there's different skills that people need to
Mhm.
cope, of course.
Mhm.
So practical ones, as well as the ones for coping
Mhm.
emotionally. And as you say, initially it can be very overwhelming and difficult, and that's it's sort of just part and parcel with the experience and the situation that you do go through that initial period of grieving, and things do get better
Mhm.
over time.
Mhm.
Probably important to just remember that things will get better, and it just taking it one step at a time.
Yep, definitely.
Something else that I would love to talk about with you is anxiety and allergies. So this is something that I also see come up a lot for people who have allergies as well as food intolerances, that people with allergies often experience a lot of anxiety as well. And it can be quite confusing trying to figure out whether what we're feeling is anxiety or if it's actually a food reaction,
Mhm.
because allergic reactions can also cause similar symptoms to anxiety. So things like heart palpitations and other physical symptoms that are related to anxiety. So, how do we distinguish between the two?
Yeah, it's really tricky. Creating awareness around that, because as humans, we don't know that actually the physical elements of anxiety and what they are. We're getting better at that, educating and awareness around that. But there are real similarities between anxiety, the physical things that happen within our bodies. So understanding and body scanning our bodies at a time where we're calm, how we're feeling, and at a time that we're anxious, how we're feeling, and doing a body scan and seeing what that means to us, because some people might have a stomach ache from anxiety and others may not. So, just understanding ourselves and our body to know what it feels like when we are feeling anxious. I use a lot of times a scale, 0 to 10, and rating our anxiety. And it gets a little bit higher, how we're feeling within our body, and understanding that. For food allergies, severe food allergies, it's about education and awareness and understanding within ourselves, you know, and asking those questions. Are our thoughts driving how we feel physically, or did I just have a new meal that I've never had before? Or did I have a meal that I prepared myself and I'm just feeling anxious because I connect food to anaphylaxis and I'm reacting in that way. So, asking those questions, finding the evidence. If I'm going to sleep and I'm feeling like I'm having a reaction, it's very unlikely if I have a food allergy that that's the case. It's more unlikely. The probability is less likely. So, then introducing the coping skills like breathing and other activities to try and see if that brings those fight or flight physical reactions to our body, because there is a real connection between what we think and how we react physically. So, if we're able to question if it's a real fear or an unreal fear, and if there's no evidence to give us that, then we can most likely see that it's anxiety. I know a lot of other people may take an antihistamine to see if it calms them, because the thing is, if it's anaphylaxis, it does not. Antihistamines do not help you in that situation. So it's a very short period of time that you would wait, by doing the breathing exercise, asking those questions, you can see if it's a physical reaction from your anxiety or whether it's real.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you. I was wondering if we could finish off, Simone, by talking about your book. So, you recently actually just released this book. Um, can you tell us what it's called and also what's inside it that's going to help people that are in this situation?
So the book is called Beyond the Allergy Diagnosis. So it's a guide to the emotional and psychological phases of allergies. As I said earlier, I see a lot of clients that have been living this for quite a long time because they feel that they have to. When I say living this for quite a long time, I mean their mental health side of things, their quality of life. It's been lessened by this diagnosis. The actual medical side of things will always stay the same, but the way that we live with it from a mental health point of view can change with great strategies and techniques. So I wrote the book because I was hoping to reach people prior to a crisis situation with their mental health and well-being. So I just wanted to create awareness and education around this. I think it's easier to read a book than maybe make an appointment with a psychologist or a counselor. Sometimes just knowing that you're not alone, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This does change ongoingly. It doesn't stay the same. It's a journey, and everyone's journey is different, but we're in this together. So I wanted to do that with this book. So it goes through 8 phases that I've found through my counseling experience with clients that people go through. So there's 8 different phases. And then towards the end, we can feel more empowered going through that. So each chapter, I ask questions at the end. There's some journal entries that you can do, and there's some positive statements to help build confidence and self esteem working through this process, and just gaining a greater understanding of what could be going on with any diagnosis, actually, not necessarily allergies, but I use allergies as the lived experience.
I love the idea of giving this book to people who are new to this situation, because there actually are things that we can do to prevent
Mhm,
the likelihood that we will develop post-traumatic
mhm,
stress as a result of allergies, that it will have an impact in terms of kind of disabling people, interfering with their usual activities and their normal life. So
mm,
yeah, I love the idea of using a book like this when we're coming to the situation to help to prevent those longer term effects
mhm.
that people can experience.
And giving people strategies and techniques. I'm all about preventative mental health and building the mental health well-being. I think it's a lot of psychologists talk to this at the moment because we have a huge problem here in Australia with this, and they're kind of at the bottom of the cliff. They're trying to catch people after, some pretty major mental health crises. They want to be at the top and stopping this from happening. So that's what this is all about, trying to prevent things. We can do so much as humans with this: self-care, self-love, learning, awareness, education. Knowledge is power. Empower ourselves with this. So that's what the book's all about.
That's great. Are there any other resources that you would recommend for people with food allergies or food allergy families?
There's so much online at the moment, some really good resources. So any good charity or organization that is reputable, I would recommend. There's a lot of information on all those pages. Just picking and choosing though, what information, and making sure it's from a reliable resource. Don't be afraid to ask the questions to your allergist. Being a nurse, one of my jobs is to share with patients, and as a counsellor with my clients, that they can be their best advocates for themselves and they can ask the questions. Don't be afraid. Write them down, because sometimes when we're in that situation, we forget what we want to ask. Write them down, take them with you. Make sure that you've checked all your questions off, asking them for really good, reputable resources, making sure it's not coming from a fear mongering perspective. That's a big thing on social media at the moment, that we're not looking for the clicks. We're actually wanting to help. So a lot of pages sometimes are driven from a place of fear, and that's something that we really want to avoid in the allergy world. We want to come from a knowledgeable, reputable site.
Yeah, that's a really good point about social media and online, and what is driving a lot of articles, websites,
Mhm.
that it is about getting clicks. And, that's true for food allergies, it's true
Mhm.
for intolerances and chronic conditions in
Mhm.
general. So that's a really good point. And I like what you said about taking in questions, writing
Mhm.
things down when you have an appointment, because I think people do get sort of overwhelmed in the
Mhm.
moment and they can forget things. And I think it can also be helpful to have somebody with you who can also pay attention and help to prompt you and remember what's
Yes.
been said as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's great.
Well, thank you so much, Simone. Thank you for speaking with me today. This has been really fantastic, and I hope that it will help people who are in this space. Where can they find your book if they want to buy your book?
So, Beyond the Allergy Diagnosis is available on all online platforms. So, depending on which country you live in, it will be available there. Amazon, Fish Pond. There's thousands of online stores. You can also, if you're within Australia or New Zealand, email me directly, Simone at foodallergycounselling.com. And I have books available on my socials: Facebook, Food Allergy Counselling, and on Insta, food_allergy_counselling, and also on Twitter, which I'm not that active on, unfortunately.
There's
But
a lot to
yeah,
keep up with there, so
there is,
yeah.
there is. So via any of those platforms, I'm reachable.
Okay, great. Well, what I'll do is I'll include all those links that you mentioned in the episode notes. So
Hmm.
if anyone wants to find out more about what you do and also find your book, they will be able to do that.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much, Simone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Thanks for everything you're doing.
In the next interview, I'm going to be speaking to US-based counsellor Lindsay Chavaria, who has also come from a nursing background and draws on her personal experiences dealing with the deeper impacts of living with health conditions, both for herself and her family. Lindsay counsels people who are facing chronic health challenges, including food reactions, and she has a lot of really beautiful insights and helpful tools to share. So I hope you'll join us next time.